Hey, what's going on, guys? Earlier tonight, Dana White announced some more breaking news. We have a new co-main event of UFC 313, which is just a little over a week away. Dan Hooker is out of his fight with Justin Gaethje, and we are now getting Justin Gaethje versus Rafael Fiziev 2 as the co-main event. It is now 3 rounds. It was originally a 5-round co-main event. It is now 3 rounds. We also have another addition to UFC 314, which is Bryce Mitchell versus Jean Silva, which is a banger fight. I'm assuming that's going to be like opening up the main card. I'm not really sure the exact placement. We also have a main event of a UFC Fight Night card, Kansas City. We have Jamahal Hill versus Khalil Rountree. And we have a couple other miscellaneous fights that have been announced over the past couple days to a week or so that I'm going to go through in this video. Let's jump right into it. We're going to start off with kind of the fights that, are interesting, but I haven't really talked about that much. And then we're going to work our way back to the pay-per-views. We have on UFC 315, which I've already done a video about UFC 315, which is headlined by Belal Muhammad versus Jack Della Maddalena. This was announced the other day. Jose Aldo versus Aiemann Zahabi. What to say about Jose Aldo versus Aiemann Zahabi? A while ago, I told you guys, people were coming up with these like great matchups for Jose Aldo, and why isn't it Dominic Cruz, or why isn't it this guy or that guy? And I said, it seems like for whatever reason, the UFC is not happy with Jose Aldo. And if you don't believe me, and I've been saying this probably for a year now, I remember I said it on a stream with Kevin Iole and John Morgan when they were kind of fantasizing about great matchups. If you don't believe me, take a look at his recent matchups. Aiemann Zahabi, Mario Bautista, Jonathan Martinez. Something that went on after the Merab fight, some negotiations that went on with the UFC and Jose Aldo. Obviously, the UFC, even though they re-signed him to a new contract, they weren't very happy with him. They're giving him, the most amount of no names, but are also dangerous fighters. Very, very bizarre. Jonathan Martinez, Mario Bautista, Aiemann Zahabi. Aiemann Zahabi, I don't believe is even ranked right now. I don't know what to say, man. I would have loved to seen Jose Aldo versus like a Sean O'Malley. I know that sounds out of left field. I would have loved to seen a Jose Aldo. Actually, I have the rankings up here. Let's see if it shows I would have loved to seen a Jose Aldo versus a Henry Cejudo. That fight was originally booked right before the pandemic. There was a bunch of cancellations. Would have liked to seen that matchup. I wouldn't even mind seeing him fighting Marlon Vera in a rematch. I wouldn't mind seeing him fighting Figgy. But instead, we're getting Jose Aldo versus Aiemann Zahabi. And I know I complain a lot, but it just seems like the UFC is getting shittier and shittier at matchmaking. Now, there's a bunch of fights that we're going to get to that I'm actually excited about. It's just very bizarre they're booking Aiemann Zahabi versus Jose Aldo. I think Aiemann Zahabi's a decent fighter. I'm trying to even remember his last fight off the top of my head. Pedro Munoz win, Javid Basharat win, Urichi Lang win, Ricky Tercios. I think Aldo's still good enough. I thought he looked decent in the Mario Bautista fight, even though I thought he lost the Mario Bautista fight. I think he'll be able to get it done against Aiemann Zahabi. Unless Aldo's falling off a cliff, which he is getting older, he is at a lower weight class, I think he'll be able to beat Aiemann Zahabi. Next fight we're going to move on to. We're going to talk about 2 fights on this card. Now, this fight card is in Des Moines, Iowa. This goes down on May 3rd, 2025. I don't know why I said the year there. Okay, I'm a little bit brain dead right now. But we have 2 fights I want to talk about. Corey Sandhagen versus Devison Figueiredo. We also have, this was announced earlier today, Marlon Vera versus Mario Bautista. Corey Sandhagen versus Devison Figueiredo. I love the matchup. I think it's a great matchup. It's a very compelling bantamweight fight. Figgy coming off the loss against Jan. Sandhagen, I believe his last fight was against Umar Nurmagomedov. So 2 guys that are still towards the top of the division. You look at the current rankings right now. Sandhagen's number 4, Devison's number 5. So in terms of rankings, it makes perfect sense. I'm happy that we're getting fight night cards outside of the Apex. Thank God for that. And it actually requires them to put on a decent main event instead of some throwaway women's MMA bout. This is an interesting matchup because I think, a lot of people associate the word overrated with they must suck. I think Corey Sandhagen's has been a bit overrated. And I think Figgy, I do think he's at a little bit of a disadvantage on the feet. Sandhagen's got really good footwork, mixes in the kicks quite a bit. But I think Figgy can mix in the grappling. But I don't know if he's going to be able to hold Sandhagen down. Umar wasn't able to hold him down for long periods of time. Sandhagen's been working on his grappling for literal years, ever since Aljo exposed him in the grappling. And so I'm kind of back and forth on this fight. But an early prediction, I'm going to go Corey Sandhagen. Just because I feel like Figgy doesn't respect a lot of guys striking. And I think Sandhagen can make him pay for that with combinations, mixing in low power and high power shots, just kind of, peppering away with him with, just jabs and just little weak punches, and then eventually, boom, flying knee. And I think Figgy tries to walk through his opponents. And I think even if Corey Sandhagen isn't able to find like a power shot, because he doesn't have quite a bit of power, I think it'll add up. And I also think Figgy, while he may be able to grapple, unless he's able to find a sub, I don't see him like taking Corey down and holding him down. I could see it going either way, but I do really like that matchup. And I lean Corey Sandhagen. I could change my pick. I'm not like locked in that pick. Okay. Another fight on this card that was actually announced today. Marlon Chito Vera versus Mario Bautista. I mean, that should be co-main event. I don't know. Yana Santos, Miesha Tate. Ew. But Marlon Vera versus Mario Bautista. I'm going to be honest, and I don't know if anybody else feels this. I'm kind of off on Marlon Vera. I mean, ever since he went out there and just completely shit the bed against Sean O'Malley in an undeserved title shot, I just kind of been off on him. Mario Bautista, I know everyone hates Mario Bautista because he beat Jose Aldo and he grappled heavily in the third round. He's a very good fighter. Mario Bautista, I've picked him in all of his last few fights. I think he's a really good, well-rounded fighter. He's a good striker, good grappler. I know people are like, oh, he stalls out fights. Early in the Aldo fight, he was walking Aldo down and landing good combinations. Marlon Vera is a slow starter. This is a 3-round fight. I could see Mario Bautista winning the first 2. Maybe Marlon Vera winning the 3rd round. I think Bautista can out-grapple him. I think Bautista can out-strike him. Vera only has a cardio advantage. And in a 5-round fight, the cardio advantage means absolutely nothing. So I'm going to go for an early pick. I'm going to go Mario Bautista in that fight. And that's kind of a really good, solid entry into the top 10. I know he's already number 10. He beats Marlon Vera. He jumps up to like number 7. And then he's 1 or 2 fights away from potential title shot. Now, I know, a lot of people aren't super happy with the Aldo performance, but I think Mario Bautista is a legit bantamweight contender in the making. And I think beating Marlon Vera will really prove that. Maybe Vera goes out there, he needs a win. Maybe he finds a kill shot. He's a slow starter. I don't think he beats Mario Bautista. Good, solid matchup. And this is actually a decent fight night card. Sandhagen, Davison Figueiredo, Marlon Vera, Mario Bautista, Yong Lee versus Trevor Peek. Oh my God, Junior Tafa, Tukos Tokos. What a garbage fight that is. It's a decent fight night card compared to some of the Apex cards we've been getting. Okay, let's move on. We also have UFC Kansas City. This goes down on April 26th. For some reason in my head, I remember April 26th was UFC 172, which I went to live. Don't ask me why I'm even saying that in this video. But we have Jamahal Hill versus Khalil Rountree. Banger fight. I would have preferred to see Jamahal Hill versus his brother in the rematch. Let him get another tune-up fight now that he's lost 2 in a row. Jamahal Hill, has he even spoke out? I think he might have just recently spoke out since the loss to Yuri Prohaska. This was a fight that was booked last year at some point. I can't remember what card it was on. I want to say it was 303. And there was some, shuffling around. And eventually Khalil Rountree pulled out. Carlos Ulberg got subbed in. Then Jamahal Hill pulled out. Then Carlos Ulberg was removed from the card or maybe got a replacement. Then Rountree, off of suspension for a banned substance, got a title shot against Pereira and gave him a hard-fought fight, which is crazy. But anyway, Jamahal just coming off a loss to Yuri Prohaska. I don't want to say it's a quick turnaround, but it's not, he's not taking his time. What was that, in January? It's UFC 311, if I'm not mistaken. January, what is it? Let me just look to confirm, make sure I'm not saying some bogus stuff. I'm pretty sure, right? Yeah, it was UFC 311, January 18th. January 18th. And now he's coming back and fighting Khalil Rountree on April 26th. I do heavily lean Jamahal Hill here, but I leaned him against Yuri. I didn't heavily lean him against Yuri. I know Khalil kind of overperformed against Alex Pereira. Listen, if it's not for the damage that Jamahal took in January and then having a quick turnaround, I'm leaning Jamahal all the way. But since he took that damage, I could see Khalil getting it done. I think a lot of people are going to pick Khalil and end up being wrong because they're giving him a participation trophy for losing to Alex Pereira. And Jamahal Hill is coming off back-to-back KO losses. You know, his last win was against his brother, if I'm not mistaken, at the Thanksgiving table, knocking his teeth down his throat, allegedly, or basically confirmed. I mean, that's Jamahal confirmed himself at this point. I like the main event. I love that the UFC's not, sitting in the Apex. I don't know how many Apex cards we're going to get this year, but when they have to go somewhere, they're actually putting on decent main events. There's some other fights that were announced for this card. Michel Pereira, Abus Magomedov, Giga Chikadze, David Onama, Ikram Alaskarov versus Andre Muniz. I'm not going to go through all those fights. By the way, Anthony Smith versus Mingyang Zhang. Hilarious matchmaking. Anthony Smith should have retired. He's going to get brutally KO'd, but he's probably going to fake another retirement after this loss. I'm picking Ikram over Andre Muniz. I don't know who I'm picking in Giga versus Onama. I'm leaning Giga, but honestly, I may pick Onama. So I don't even know who I'm picking on that fight. I'm just going to say I slightly lean Giga right now, but I haven't put a whole lot of thought into that. Michel Pereira, Abus Magomedov, two guys with literally zero gas tank. I'm going to lean Abus. I know most people are probably going to pick Michel Pereira. I'm going to lean Abus. They both have 1 round cardio. So after 1 round, we have to see. Abus went 3 rounds with Caio Baralho. So I'm going to pick Abus solely off of that for an early pick. In terms of the main event, Jamahal Hill, Khalil Rountree, I'm going Jamahal Hill. Like the matchup. Love that it's a fight night main event. Love that the UFC's getting out of the Apex. And I actually think this is great matchmaking by the UFC. Okay, we have more. UFC 314, Bryce Mitchell versus Jean Silva. Jean Silva called Bryce Mitchell out last weekend after a brutal KO win over Melsik Bagdasaryan. Bryce Mitchell apparently called the UFC and says he wants that fight. I do think Jean Silva's a bit overhyped, and we don't know the extent of his defensive grappling and how he will hold up if he really fights a heavy pressure fighter. But man, Bryce's striking is garbage. He's dumb as a box of rocks as well. So I love this matchmaking by the UFC. I think it's funny. I think it's very funny. You have Bryce fighting an absolute killer in Jean Silva. I think a lot of people... I think it's going to be a weird fight for the fan base because there's a lot of people like overhyping Jean Silva and kind of crazy on the bandwagon. I'm not saying even that's misplaced, but then you have the people are like, man, I love what Bryce talks about, man. Bryce is so based, bro. And I'd love this matchmaking. Jean Silva, this is a good test. Is Bryce still in the rankings? I don't think he is. Let me actually take a look. He's not. So Bryce is no longer in the rankings. But if Jean Silva wins this fight, he should get a ranked fight. So if Jean Silva wins this fight, I'd like to see him against a Danny Gay, a Calvin Kattar. Oh, no, Bryce is in the rankings, number 13. I'm done. How did I miss that? Oh, it wasn't even on screen either. I don't know how I missed this. So if Jean Silva wins this, it gets him into the rankings. I think that's a good spot to get him in the rankings. You could book like a Jean Silva against a Giga Onama winner, or even like an Aljamain Sterling if the UFC really wants to punish Aljamain Sterling. But I don't know. Aljamain Sterling... Depending on what Jean Silva's grappling looks like, Aljo could beat him. But yeah, either way, you can tell the UFC wants to push Jean Silva. They're giving him a favorable matchup in Bryce Mitchell at UFC 314. I'm going Jean Silva by brutal KO in the first round. But this card, I'm not the biggest fan of the main event, but this card's really solid. It's really filling out. Alexander Volkanovski, Diego Lopez for the featherweight title. I almost said interim. Michael Chandler, Mr. CU at the top versus Paddy Pimblett. Nikita Krylov versus Dominic Reyes. Jair Rodriguez versus Patricio Pitbull. Jeff Neal versus Carlos Prates. Verna Jandiroba versus Yan Xiaonan. Chase Hooper versus Jim Miller. Don't really care. But now you add Bryce Mitchell versus Jean Silva at the bottom, or I guess it'll be somewhere. It'll probably be like a feature prelim or opening up the main card. The UFC will reshuffle this by the time we get to it. And this is right around the corner, boys. I know it sounds crazy. April 12th is right around the corner. It's about to be March in a couple days. So, love the fight. Love the matchmaking. I think Jean Silva absolutely starches Bryce Mitchell. Next fight and last fight we're going to talk about, and probably the fight you guys most want to hear me talk about. I don't know why I'm stumbling over my words there. New co-main event of UFC 313. we have Justin Gaethje versus Rafael Fiziev. 3-round fight now. It was originally Justin Gaethje, Dan Hooker, 5-round fight. Dan Hooker broke his hand, pulled out yesterday. They were looking for a replacement. There was talk of Gamrot. There was talk of Beneil Dariush. There was some talk, really it was kind of just pure speculation. Charles Oliveira, Arman Tsarukyan. Fiziev steps in. It's a rematch. We're getting a rematch. Justin Gaethje won the previous fight a couple years back now. I believe that was on the Leon Edwards-Kamaru Usman trilogy fight card, if I'm not mistaken, off the top of my head. And Fiziev apparently has been looking for a fight for a bit. Dana White was asked at a press conference recently, like in the last month or so, Fiziev saying he can't find a fight and he wants to fight. And they said, oh, well, it's more complicated than that. That tells me that Rafael Fiziev is in shape. He hasn't fought since he had that knee injury against Mateusz Gamrot. And now he's getting a rematch with a guy in Justin Gaethje who had a very competitive fight with. I thought Justin Gaethje won that fight. It was very, very competitive. And Justin Gaethje's coming off that brutal KO loss against Max Holloway. You don't come back the same from a loss like that. And I got to be honest, I'm a little bit bummed out because Justin Gaethje versus Dan Hooker was the epitome of kind of what we've been talking about for a while. Like, let's get some fresh matchups at lightweight. I'm tired of seeing the same carousel of Dustin Poirier versus Michael Chandler and Justin Gaethje versus Dustin Poirier and Max Holloway versus this guy or whatever it may be. And we were finally getting a fresh banger matchup in Gaethje versus Hooker, which you knew was going to be an absolute savage fight. And I think the UFC did the best they could with the replacement, but it's another rematch. Now, in terms of who I'm picking, I was picking Dan Hooker over Gaethje just because of the KO loss. You get eye gouged twice, you get your nose brutally broken, and then you get brutally slept. You don't come back the same. A lot of time when you get your nose broke like that, the way he did, sometimes the nose just never heals up the right way again. I think Fiziev is not coming off the couch. I think Fiziev is in great shape. I think he was looking for a fight, and I think he probably is able to make the adjustments. I do worry about he's been sitting out. He is coming off a knee injury. So I really do think it's a toss-up. But right now, and I'm going to have to think about this heavily in the next week because I'm going to do predictions. I'm going to return to predictions for UFC 313. But I'm going to go Rafael Fiziev, man. He's so technical on the feet. He has nasty power in all of his limbs. He's super dynamic. He's shown 5-round cardio before, even though it's not a 5-round fight. Gaethje really started to come alive in that 3rd round with his jab. And I just don't think it's 2 years later now, I believe. I believe it's been 2 years since that fight. Let me actually pull it up and take a look. Right now, it's been a bit. It's February of 2025. Yeah, they fought March 18th of 2023. So it's almost exactly going to be 2 years. And in those 2 years, Gaethje's taken damage, took a brutal KO loss, nasty broken nose. And now he's fighting Fiziev. I do worry about Fiziev in the long layoff and whatnot and the injury. But I think he's going to be able to get it done against Justin Gaethje. Maybe I change my pick, but I think I'm going to stay probably early prediction Rafael Fiziev. Love that the UFC was able to salvage this co-main event. I actually really like 313. I know there's some people complaining about it. I think when you have a banger main event with a deserved title shot, I think it makes the whole card look better. But you have Justin Gaethje, Rafael Fiziev as a co-main event. I think it's a great fight. Then you have Amanda Lemos versus Yasmin Lucindo. That should not be featured fight at all, but that's a decent fight. Bobby Green, I'm not calling another man king, versus Mauricio Rofi is a good fight. Jalen Turner and Nacio Bahamondes, absolute barn burner. I usually don't say that, so that's why I kind of stumbled over my words there. Bruno Fajeda, Armin Petrosian, solid fight. The rest of these fights are just okay prelims. Ray Surya versus Joshua Van's a great fight. Curtis Blades versus Rizvan Kuniev is a decent fight. Marion Santos, Francis Marshall is a decent fight as well. Carlos Leal got robbed in his UFC debut. We'll see if he can get a win over Alex Morono. I think this is a really solid card. There's not a lot of fights that jump off the paper outside the main and co-main event. I think the UFC absolutely needed to keep Gaethje on the card to kind of salvage the card a bit, even though the main event was still doing a lot of heavy lifting. And I love this fight. And also I want to include in this video, Justin Gaethje posted Armin and Charles understandably said no. Max and Dustin understandably said no. Moicano got the call and said no. Props to Fiziev for volunteering to fly across the world and take this fight. Big risk here for me taking this rematch against an elite striker. Life's a trip. Best live show on earth going down March 8th. Like I don't love hearing this. This right here I don't absolutely love hearing. It's true, but that tells me you're not very confident. Someone said, why the F did Arman say no? And Gaethje said, that's a big weight cut on short notice. Moicano didn't take any damage against Islam. People were acting like he had a chance to win that fight. Apparently he turned it down. We don't know for sure what the reason for that is. And let's see what else we got here. Okay, this is just UFC's Twitter. So there you go. There's my reaction to all the fights. Let me know what you guys think. I'm genuinely curious. What do you think of the new co-main event? What do you guys think of UFC 313? I'm really actually looking forward to UFC 313. I'm glad they were able to make Gaethje versus Fiziev on short notice, even though it's a rematch. I wanted Gaethje versus Hooker. Who knows? We may get that down the line. We may never get that at this point. So it's going to be interesting. Fiziev wins. He's in a good spot in the division to potentially get a title shot, considering there's no true number one contender in the lightweight division right now. So let me know what you guys thought of all these fights down in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and thank you so much for watching.